Nancy, your parents moved to Alaska in 1938. What drew them up north?
It was the end of the Depression. It was kind of still in Depression times, and they had moved from Boise, Idaho, where they got married, to Southern California. And my dad's job there wasn't the best, and his father and my dad's brother and sister were all here in Fairbanks, in the area. My grandfather was a cook in gold camps.
No kidding.
So I think my uncle did some of that too. And so, as I understand the story, they sent Dad and Mom a ticket to come up. And so they arrived here in March of 1938 when it was quite chilly. Mom was pregnant with my oldest brother.
Wow.
And so they came, and things were pretty rough, I think, those first few years.
You think?
But they lived in a little cabin down on 4th Avenue downtown, and they stayed. They ended up, Dad found a job at FE Company, which is the building across the street here, and he liked that, and Mom started working for the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they soon, by 19...
And that was in the old Federal Building, right?
Yes, that's in the building downtown. And by 1939, I mean, they'd only been here a while, but they were pretty neat at saving, and then Federal Housing Authority had come in so they could get a FHA loan, and so they started building a house just on the other side of Minnie Street in 1939, and moved in 1940. By then they had 2 kids. My 2 oldest brothers are just maybe 16 months apart. So they moved into the house. And
is this the house where you live now?
It is the house where I live
now. Well, we'll come
now.
back and visit that.
Right.
But when I looked at all the places where your dad worked or your mom worked or what they went through, this was really a huge growth time for Fairbanks. Of course, the war, the Alcan highways being built, the Lend-Lease program that ferried all those aircraft over to Russia. And so this time must have been so exciting and dynamic. Did they ever talk about that time?
They talked about it quite a bit. That things like when Mom was working in the attorney's office, so when Ladd Air Force Base was transferred to Fort Wainwright to become the Army base, Mom did almost all of the deeds and the typing and she was a phenomenal typist.
Wow.
And so she did, and you're doing that stuff in 3 and 4 carbons and that. So she liked to talk about, that transfer going on. And then when the Lend-Lease piece was going on, and the Russian pilots were coming in, they would often walk through the neighborhoods and that. And so there's lots of stories about, maybe some things disappeared from gardens and that kind of thing when the pilots were wandering through. But who knows if they're true. Yeah. But, and so, that was part of the story. And then I think with, with the dew line and White Alice type things in the communication systems, Fairbanks really did become important. So there was more activity, more building things. Dad was involved in when Island Homes was first formatted. It was, I think, an FHA program too, and Queens Court, which is down off of First Avenue a little ways. So those kinds of pieces helped him with his real estate business, which I think he started in the late 40s maybe. Mm-hmm. So all of that played in for them. And I think, there was a lot of energy in the community.
Well, your family thrived, obviously. How many siblings do you have, and where are you in the birth order?
There's 6 of us, so I have 5 siblings, and I'm in the perfect spot.
Where's the perfect spot?
I'm number 5. And you have to realize, so my oldest brother right now, he probably wouldn't want me to say this, but he's 81, and my younger sister just turned 60. So we never lived together, the 6 of us. We're all the same parents, but we never lived together. So I'm number 5. My oldest brother was a freshman in high school, I think, when I was born. And my sister is almost 6 years older than me, and then 2 other boys in there. But the reason I say I was in the perfect spot is, I didn't get to know my brothers very well when I was a kid, but I was only 10 or 11 when they started coming back to town. I think there was an unwritten rule that said that if you married one of the Cook brothers, you had to move to Fairbanks. So all three of my sisters-in-law had to move to Fairbanks, one from Idaho, one from Oregon, one from Washington. And so I got to know my brothers then with their wives. My sisters-in-law became, like big sisters to me, and I got to babysit their kids. And so I got to know my brothers in a whole different way than either one of my sisters. And, I had time to live with my sisters. We don't know one another real well, but we're working on that. Because there's a gap. My sister Jenny's 6 years older, my sister Tony's 7 years younger than me. So there's a gap there, but we're working on getting to know one another better.
Do you think your parents had a plan that babysitting was kind of already taken care of if you spaced them out like this?
I don't think there was a plan. I'm surprised that after 3 boys, my mother didn't say, hey.
Yeah, enough already.
So, and my birth announcement when I was born was very clever. I think my dad designed it. So they sent out a poker hand. We have a full house, so they had 3 kings and 2 queens. So I made, and it was kind of a cute. Little card. And then, 7 years later, along comes number 6.
Number 6. So was it what form of would it still be poker with number 6?
I think that probably then it was, oh my gosh, where did she come from?
Well, now, of course, you also grew up in tumultuous times. So you were here, 14 years old when the flood hit Fairbanks? How did your family, where were you living then? In the house you are now?
Yep.
And what was it like?
Yeah. It was, it starts out on the Sunday before, I think it was probably August 13th. Mom and my sisters and I were at the lake. And Dad had already come to town for some reason, but my brother Mike and his wife show up and say, you guys need to pack up and come to town now. Dad sent us out here to get you. And we're like, why? It's a perfectly nice day. And they said, nope, let's get going. The Salcha River was really high when we crossed it. So Mom sent Jenny to, tell some of the other people on the other side of the lake. And then we headed to town, and we made it through. We were close to some of the last cars to make it back to town from Harding Lake. So people who didn't come in, some of them were out there, while other parts of their family were in town. My brother Skip at that time was the manager of what was then A67, which became Alaska Land, which is now Pioneer Park. And so he was concerned about, they were trying to sandbag and do stuff to protect that with the river. People were trying to protect the hospital with sandbags. My sister was working for Jessens Weekly. She was home from college, and she was working for Jessens Weekly, and she wanted to stay in town as long as possible. But by Monday morning, it became evident we needed to vacate. And our neighbors over on Well Street were the Parrish family, and they had a ski land at that time. So the neighborhood was or at least Well Street was invited up to ski land.
Wow.
And so there was, for a 14-year-old, it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
It seemed like a good time.
That's right.
For my brothers and my folks, I think it was a little stressful.
You think? Yeah.
So we went up there. People took as much groceries as they could, and all the families, ate together. They had a bunkhouse up there. I can't even really remember where we slept or a whole lot about it, but we were up there for almost a week. The guys, my dad and some of the other dads came down in town once, I think, and boated over to the houses and tried to go through freezers and get the food that was still good, but stuff was floating and that.
What was the cleanup like afterwards?
Cleanup was pretty impressive. In our house, our basement got full all the way to the ceiling, but nothing on the first floor. But my mom had a lot of ceramic stuff, a lot of cement, the stuff that turns into the ceramic, the dry bags of stuff. And we had a piano down there.
Yeah.
And so trying to get all that out and shoveling out all the, the
The silt and
yeah, all this stuff was just really quite a process.
yeah. And of course, mold is a concern, so you had
Yeah.
to dry everything out.
Yeah, and my dad's office then was on 3rd Avenue. He owned the building where the creperie is now, so his office was there. I spent a lot of time feeding papers through a mangle iron, all of the, paper, trying to squish out all the water and dry them out. And we
All his business papers.
yeah, all that stuff. We had tables out on 3rd Avenue and laying things out and trying to dry them. My brother Skip's house was on 3rd Avenue, on the other side of Noble Street, and his house actually burnt down. So that burnt to the water level. The neighbor's house did too. Somebody had a candle that was left on, I think. And so that was a little bit stressful. However, they at least had insurance for half the house. Nobody had flood insurance at the time. So they had insurance for anything that was on the top half of the house. But,
So I know you were an outstanding student, but you had some health issues that kind of compromised your schooling a little bit when you were growing up. Tell us about that.
but they didn't compromise me too much. But when when Mom was pregnant with me, she had a tumor on one of her ovaries, and there was we were both growing at the same time. So they decided to remove the tumor on her ovary, and as the story goes, again, you never know how many retellings there's been. But the doctor who did the surgery left town, and he was going on vacation or going to a meeting or doing something, and Mom started hemorrhaging, and she told the nurses at the hospital, most of whom were Providence sisters, that they needed to do something about that because she was pregnant. And they said, "No, you're not pregnant." She said, "Well, I am. It's number 5. Trust me on this one." And they said, "Well, it's not in the chart." And the doctor had forgotten to put it there. But they did eventually stop the bleeding and what was going on with her. But there's some thought that whatever medication she had and whatever they needed to do there somehow affected my heart. And I had a hard time as a little one growing enough, and I was had a hard time sleeping. I needed quiet and that kind of thing. So I wasn't growing as I should be. And when they knew I had a heart murmur, the doctors did. And very interestingly, they ended up turning to a woman named Hanka Poborski, who had been in prison camps in Poland. And she and her husband had come to the United States. And she was a doctor in Poland, but never really a doctor here. And she's one who, I have no idea really how they got to know her and how they came to trust her so much, but she recommended that I live away from the rest of the family in the quiet. So it was either rent an apartment somewhere or use the lake cabin. And I think with finances and having kids off at college already and others ready to go to college, it became, we've got this cabin, why don't Mom and Nancy go live out there? Which is, I think of what both my parents did in that regard. Dad had 3 kids at home then, and Mom had me out there. No electricity, no running water, a wood furnace, no telephone, and my mother doesn't drive. She never drove. So, it's a pretty incredible story in terms of, what she was willing to do. We were there from February, I think, pretty much through the summer. But by the time you get to May, the stress is kind of gone. But those intervening months, I think, must have been really hard on her. Her dad and their other kids came out once a week, sometimes maybe twice a week, cut up wood. Mom would, and they'd bring in more water, but sometimes Mom had to go out on the lake herself and, re-chop the hole and bring water in. She'd set me up in the window so I could see her.
Well, that set up a really strong love you have for that cabin, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And so I inherited the cabin, but all my life, a lot of summers were spent out there.
Sure.
Just doing what was fun and having a good time and exploring the woods and just I have a love of nature and a love of water, I think, because of that place. So
I can imagine. Well, going to academics, now you were valedictorian for your class, but tell me, was academics always important in your family? Because of course you have amazing siblings too who are quite accomplished.
It was. My mom had this dream that all 6 of her children would go to school back east, and 5 of them, well, actually I ended up back east for a year too. So Mike went to Lehigh, Skip went to MIT, Jeff started at University of Pennsylvania, but then he transferred to University of Oregon. My sister Jenny went to Wellesley. And I'm an incredibly stubborn person. And Mom kept pushing me to apply to really top-notch schools, and I didn't really want to, so at one point I said, if you ask me that one more time, I'm just not going to apply to any of them. So I didn't. She did. She asked me one more time, and I didn't apply. I said, okay. It gave me the perfect out. So I decided, and I did not want to be very far away from home. I'm really a homebody, Fairbanks person. So I went to University of Oregon. But anyway, academics were very important to us. Everybody, we studied to get, Mom and Dad studied with us.
Really?
Yeah, Dad was, helping all of us with math all the time, and Mom typed a lot of papers and helped us with sentence structure. She loved to write, and so there was lots of that going on. You were in every spelling bee, so Mom would give you the spelling words and help you with that. So there was, and reading, you never were not reading a book. You were always reading something. And and even when you were reading, you still might have somebody reading something to you. So the expectation was pretty high that we would be good students. And I think for my parents, Mom went to business college, Dad got to go to a year of business college, but I think they would love to have had education, and so more education. So I think, for them it was this, we can give you this gift and we're going to give it to you and you're going to appreciate it.
Well, I think it's a classic American story, isn't it? That you can't have something, but you want your kids to be able to have that. And oftentimes it's an education and it's an advancement up the social ladder. Yeah. Well, let's get you eventually to UAF. So, as you mentioned, you started in Oregon and then went over to Vermont?
Yeah. Oregon was too big.
Too big.
And then
okay.
I thought, well, I'll go to University of Vermont. My older sister lived in New Hampshire at the time. And I thought it'd be kind of interesting to be near her and her husband and get to know them a little bit better, as a sort of adult. But University of Vermont was too far away from home. And so I concocted this plan of asking my parents if I could please come back and go to the university. However, I said, I don't want to go to the university full-time as a normal student. My first year back, I'd really like to live at the lake and do correspondence classes, maybe take a couple night classes. And then after this year, because while I'm at the lake, living there by myself all winter, I'm going to figure out the meaning of life. And then I promise I'll go to school full-time the next few years. They went for it. I was
well,
like,
I think
wow.
everybody wants to know the meaning of life, so if you can support that kind of research effort.
Yeah, so they went for it. And so then there I was, commuting to Harding Lake it must have been 73, 4, something like that
sure.
By then. When, mind you, it was much colder than it is now.
Yeah, that's right. Except this year, which throwback to that period. Hearing your story about finding the meaning of life, of course, this is the late 60s, early 70s that you're starting to come into your own intellectually and explore the world around you. And that's a heady time, of course, with the New Age movement and consciousness raising and whatnot. That's really taking off at this point. Do you think there was any connection, or was it an independent development on your part?
Well, it's a little bit of a story. Do you want it?
I want it.
Okay. So,
well, it's leading to the meaning of life, so I think we're bound to it.
It is, hold your breath. So part of our growing up was when Mom and Dad moved here, a friend of theirs told them that they should have their kids go to church. And so Mom and Dad did. We, all except for my younger sister, didn't go a whole lot, but there's a reason for that. We all went to the Mormon church. So I don't know if you know where the Mormon church used to be, but it used to be where the Korean church is, right up the street here on the corner of Monroe and Minnie.
Yeah, okay.
So, so the first 5 of us went to church there, which was pretty neat because you could send your kids to church and you could have Sunday, some quiet time on Sunday.
Nice.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Right? So we all had, a basis in Christianity and in the Mormon church, and I liked the Mormon church. But there were events that happened. 1968 is a key year for me, and that's the year after the flood. But all sorts of sort of serious things happened that year. A couple of my parents' closest friends died. Neighborhood friends that we'd known forever. And back then they were pretty young. And so that was hard, and I could see, and that was also when you didn't talk about death. I mean, we've come a long way. So you didn't talk about those things, but I was intuitive enough to see a struggle in my parents' life. That's also 68 is when Martin Luther King Jr. was shot, and June of 1968 is when Bobby Kennedy was shot. And I was, thought of myself as kind of a Democrat and, in civil rights and those kinds of things. Even though I was young, that was kind of important to me. So, those things happening, hearing, that presidential election when George Wallace was running and the whole, sort of the attacks on African American, in Negroes, of that time was just really difficult. The whole civil rights movement was interesting to me. And then in 1968, this is right after my freshman year of high school, my closest friend and her mother and brother were killed in a car accident on the way back to Harding Lake. And we had spent, the previous day water skiing and playing together. And that was pretty much a life-changing event for me. A lot of people would say, oh, they're in a better place, or it was in God's plan, and I'm like, I don't really need that God. Just different people you would encounter. And so, that was a challenge, and so I kind of gave up on church at that point. I said, I don't really need this. And so that kind of, and I had some friends in high school that we read, I don't know if we really studied or understood the Upanishads, and I wrote a paper on Zoroastrianism. So I can't even say it anymore. Read all the Siddhartha books and, just sort of exploring, trying to find, I don't know, I felt there must be some meaning.
Something.
So that kind of continued on, and I was, when I went to University of Oregon, I utilized the Newman Center and met with a guy, maybe every other week or something, and started reading philosophy type things. And so, I don't know, I just felt like coming back home and figuring if I could live at the lake and just be, maybe I would find the meaning of life. I had a great winter, but I'm not really sure
You found the meaning. Well, I mean, it's a long tradition, though, Nancy. I mean, think of going back to Walden by Thoreau.
So, and I had read quite a bit of that, Walden and that. And you go out on the lake when the lake is frozen. And it took me a while to build up my courage, to walk down on the lake. I mean, it's dark out there. You're walking out, the snow is generally drifted. You walk out on the lake and you lie down and you just look up at this magnificent Milky Way or the Northern Lights or the moon, and you can hear the ice popping and just the rifle effect of the ice popping. And then you watch it all come back to life. It was pretty incredible. But like I said,
kind of puts our petty sort of day-to-day considerations in a unique category. You don't care about them quite the same way, or they're not as pressing as when you have the big picture.
Right.
Kind of.
And I think, that big picture piece for me, I had determined that God wasn't sort of, for me, some superhuman that was checking off, well, today these people are going to die, or there's going to be this war, and this is going to happen. That wasn't, I just had no idea, really. I felt like there was something bigger than me or bigger than humans. There's something. But I still may be on the journey of figuring out exactly what that is. But
That's a great journey to be on.
yeah. So that's. I think you asked me a question that related to all of that rambling.
Well, no, it was during the 60s and
so-
70s and that whole where America's really reassessing its values and
Right.
looking to the future and humans' place in the universe.
And there was, there was the civil rights movement going on, and then shortly after civil rights, you have Title IX going on. So there's all those pieces of how do we all fit together, in that, close to that same time frame, my brother Skip and his wife, who had, now I can't remember if they had 2 or 3 sons, I should know this. I think they had 2 sons, and my brother was at Willamette Law School, and they decided they wanted to adopt an Alaska Native child. And so they adopted a child, Dana, who is part Eskimo and part Caucasian. And so that really opened up an interest for me too. Our aunt was Athabascan. My dad's sister-in-law is Athabascan, so we had that piece of heritage with us too. And then, my nephew. So there was kind of that, opening up of seeing us. And I think Fairbanks was a good place to grow up and just see people as people. Certainly there was lots of prejudices and that too, but I think as a kid, we were able to see beyond that, encouraged to see beyond that by our parents.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get you to UAF then, because at this time, I'll break it again into sports and academics, because you distinguish yourself in both. But Title IX in this tumultuous time is one of those events that really would have wide ramifications in higher education especially. And that was that women's programs and sports teams and whatnot, if they received federal funding, couldn't be discriminated against and had to be afforded the same funding and attention as men's. Mm-hmm. Did that influence you at all when you were playing at UAF?
Well, it did. And I didn't play at UAF. I don't think I played the first year I was back because I was living at the lake. But then I played after that. And, and it was just coming into being then, the piece of, we played in the first intercollegiate, the sort of I don't know if it was NC2A then, but the first women's intercollegiate basketball game. I was part of that team.
How cool.
And so that was really a lot of fun, and the Title IX piece was a big piece for us. One of our teammates, Linda Moffat, who's no longer living, really, did a lot of push on communicating with the university and the powers that be, that the women's team and the men's team needed to, have equality in terms of travel and scholarships and that. And so there's a tribute to that at the university, right inside the Patty Gym. There's a nice tribute and a tribute of the team there. So that's a pretty neat piece there. And the other thing that I did besides jumping around trying to find the right college was that I broke the news to my parents that I wasn't going to graduate after 4 years. I figured I'd stay a 5th year. But I was able to tell them the 5th year won't cost you any because I have a basketball scholarship. So, and that was fun too, to be able to, stay that extra year, which provided me to do my student teaching in that then too. So the title, and then after I graduated in '76, just you can see almost exponentially how much the program really grew. I was lucky to play with women, many of whom are still in town here.
Do you still know and keep in touch with your teammates then?
We have a lunch about Linda Dolney of Ann's Greenhouse organized. She's the organizer. She gets us together. Every other month or so, we have a lunch together. We used to play City League together for quite a while, but knees and backs and other things have, we don't do the City League piece
what
anymore.
What is with that,
So yeah, that was, it was fun. And Diane Darnell, who's still in town, was one of our coaches. Arlen coached the first year, and then Diane after that. And Diane's done marvelous things, really pushing women's sports, and then also she's part of the senior games type thing.
Were you watching these coaches, women particularly coaches? Did you have a mind to be a coach? Because you were ultimately, as an educator, also turned out to be a basketball coach or an athletics coach. Was that in the back of your mind, Nancy?
I think to a degree it was in the, I don't know if it was in my mind. I really appreciated how Diane broke the game down for us and showed us, because this was really early on, really showed us how to be better at the fundamentals and the basic things of basketball, and I appreciated that. And then while I was in college, things like, it was called at the time Little Dribblers, but now it's Fairbanks Youth Sports. So younger kids were
Little
learning.
Dribblers, I don't know, branding it that, yeah.
But by then, so I'm back home, and my sister, when I'm 20, 21, my sister is 13, 14, so she's in junior high, and she's playing sports. Actually, Father McGuigan was one of her coaches. Father McGuigan was a counselor in the public schools, which many people don't realize. So he was at Maine Junior High when my sister was at school there.
No kidding.
And he was one of the coaches. And so Mom would sometimes travel with the team, and so I'd go and kind of watch. And so that kind of led me, I think, into, doing some things with the Little Dribblers kids, or starting to think about clinics. And then when I went to Delta to first, I was at the junior high the first year, and then at the high school a couple of years after that. And coaching just seemed to fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I want to turn to academics right now, because you majored in history and minored in math. Is that right?
Math and anthropology. My first minor was in anthropology.
You didn't want to limit yourself.
Well, and I think to get my teaching degree, anthropology wouldn't work as a minor, but math would. And I liked math a lot. And so, again, in my 5th year, I think I finished off some math things to have that as a minor. And then that opened up the opportunity for me to teach either history or math. And I student taught in both. So all sorts of good things happened in that regard.
Okay, so you graduate, you decide to be an educator, and you go to Fort Greely.
I actually I wanted to not teach in Fairbanks. I wanted to go somewhere where people might not know me. So I went 100 miles south. And, and Mom was very excited about that. She came down with me and helped me set up my apartment and my classroom and all of that. But it was a chance to be. You can tell I'm really a homebody when you think 100 miles away. It's a long way away.
Well, still, but it's a smaller community, and two things come to mind. Education in smaller communities, and boy, basketball is so important in rural Alaska. It's the sport. So talk a little bit about those two pieces. What was it like to be a fledgling teacher, and what was it like to be a coach?
Being a fledgling teacher at Fort Greely, teaching junior high, was very interesting to me. And there'd been a teacher there, probably the worst thing that can happen to a first-year teacher. There'd been a teacher who'd been there for 6 or 7 or 8 years, maybe, who then, was a revered teacher, and she, had to leave. And so there were many people who thought, you should teach the same way. And I was, I've mentioned that I was stubborn. I was going to do it my way. and so it actually worked out relatively well in doing it my way. And I learned a lot about junior high kids, and probably I didn't learn it fast enough, but I did begin to learn it in the importance. And what I mean, I think one of the importance things, particularly with junior high kids, is they are struggling for identity, and they need people
It's
to...
a tough transition period, isn't it?
Yeah, they really need people to like them, to learn to like them. And they're pretty aware of the fact in some ways that they're quirky and, kind of stubborn themselves. And I, got to know the kids a little bit. And then I was coaching junior high boys, and the boys were a little bit of a problem that, a woman was going to be their coach. But we played some one-on-one games, and it became apparent that I could probably coach them since they couldn't handle me one-on-one. And I wasn't even that good, but I didn't need to be. So it was a good experience.
Mm-hmm.
I did, however, though, decide to go traveling with a couple of friends. I actually went back to the university and finished off some things in math, and then traveled with a couple of friends from the basketball team, took a year off. And then I went back and taught in Delta, where I taught PE in the high school and the elementary school. And that was really funny, because I learned, if you say to a kindergarten, let's make a circle, and you look at the kids, and all of a sudden they're all going like this on the floor, and they're making a circle. And I had envisioned we would all hold hands. So you really learn the importance of directions.
Yeah.
And what people could understand. We set up to do relays one time later in the year, and when the first person gets back and tags you, then you take off. So the first person got back and tagged someone, and they all took off. So you had to be really clear.
That's great.
And I learned a lot about that from kids. And then I coached the girls basketball team there, and I had a delightful time with those kids. And that was in the day when there weren't as many regulations. So often we would come to town in my car, and maybe another parent's car, and play a game in town and go back. So we were with the kids a lot, travel different places, stay in a school with them. So it was, it was fun, and we had really good relationships.
Well, then let's get you to Monroe. You were approached to come here, weren't you?
So I got a call from, there's three men, George Sunborg, Cliff Berglund, and John Hajdukovic. And George was the caller, and wanted to know if I'd go to lunch. They wanted to talk to me about the possibility of coaching at Monroe. And I said, sure, I'll do that. I'll go to lunch. I didn't really know anything about Monroe. I had friends here, and then we played basketball against one another, but I didn't really know anything about the school. So we went to lunch, and by then I had kind of figured out that I probably wouldn't go back to Delta. And so it ended up being, and I said, if I coach, I don't really have any desire to teach PE. I'd really rather be able to teach either math or history. PE is just not my calling. And so they set me up then with the principal at the time, who was Bill Cooper, who was the resigning principal, but the new principal wasn't here. And Bill Cooper was he was really an interesting person, and he was so excited when he heard that I had a major in history, because that was his field too.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
And that I wanted to teach either history or math, and they happened to have an opening, and so he went ahead and hired me. So the next principal had to put up with me. And so that's, and the team the year before I came had been 0-22, and one of my friends said to me, you need to ask them not to schedule 23 games, because you don't want to go 0-23, And I said, well, really,
you could tie, but not, break that.
You don't want to break that record. So I said, okay. So I said, 22 games if possible, nothing more. And I don't remember now if it was 21 or 22 games what we had. But.
Well, okay. Well, you obviously were a phenomenal success, because within several years, you're a principal, and then later you're director of the schools and the head of the Monroe Foundation. We'll chart that piece. But who was here when you got here besides well, I guess he left. Cooper left pretty quickly. But then, and what was the structure like? Because that's changed a great deal.
Right. Well, the building that we're in right now was not here. This was old. The connecting between the high school and the elementary school, there was like old buildings brought from Weeks Field, I think, or something that were here. And the elementary school had just, it was its first year, 79, 80, so the year I came was the first year for the two-story elementary school. The school board had hired a woman to kind of be what they called the director of schools at the time, Sister Eileen Brown, who was a holy name sister. So she came up from Oregon, from Portland area. And so her, her responsibilities at the time were to, not in terms of fundraising, because Father McGuigan was the fundraiser, but her responsibilities were to try to figure out how to build the school up more. And there were some struggles. It was pretty small at the time when I came. How do we get more people here? How do we, improve all the academic pieces? The Jesuit volunteers who had staffed through much of the 70s had pulled out. The Jesuit priests were pretty much not here. There were a few religious sisters here when I came. But so they were transitioning into lay faculty. And that's a big
It's a big
piece.
transition,
Yeah.
right. When I was a
So,
boy, they were all nuns or,
Yeah. And the school had a lot with the Jesuit volunteers during the through the 60s and 70s. So there was just a lot of transition going on. So Sister Eileen was here, and then Sister Marie Bertrand was a science teacher. Sister Mary Claire taught English and religion. Sister Carol Louise had the library. And there were other religious sisters, Sister Adrian, others in the elementary school that names aren't coming quite as quickly. But and then new, other lay teachers. Another person who started the same year I did, Mary Williams, who's a little bit older than I am. Mary's still subbing here. She finally retired about 7 years, 5, 6, 7 years ago, but she's still back subbing. For years she helped with the academic decathlon team. So
wow.
It's fun to run into her still.
I'll bet. Well, and I want to ask, some of the most incredible leaders I've ever met, smart, capable, engaging, have been nuns, sisters. Were any of them role models for you, or did you see any of that kind of quality in the staff here?
Well, Sister Marie Bertrand, who taught science, and the kids loved her, so she was one who I learned a lot from. Just kind of really more observing kids and how much they appreciated her, and kind of how she knew each student, and there weren't that many students, so it was easier to know them, but so I watched her a lot. Sister Eileen Brown became for me a key person in my life, mentor in terms of faith and that too. So, kind of watching her and listening to her a lot. So there, Margaret Groban, who was an English teacher and an art teacher here at that time, there were people to observe and to watch and to learn from. And in many ways, I might have learned the most about teaching from coaching.
Really? Tell me how that works.
Coaches have to break everything down. You can't say to somebody, go make a layup. You have to break it down in all the components. And you have to help kids understand that you're going to miss 20 layups before you make 20, and that's okay. So you have to do a lot of that, breaking things down and then putting them back together, so you learn all the different skills that go into a layup or into a free throw, and then you put it together and you have the whole. And that's a lot of what a teacher's trying to do. We might know where we want to be at the end, but how do I break it down into the manageable pieces so these kids will understand it? And how do I get them through? And the other thing that I did a lot as a coach, we started every practice with a story.
With a story?
With a story. And who knows? I don't know if I can remember any of the stories now, but there's a lot of storytelling, and oftentimes the story has a point. It might be about listening, or might be about teamwork, I don't know. Or it just might be a story that's fun and gets people laughing, or you can just sit down and you're trying to build this group of girls into a team. And so you do it through stories. And then the other thing I would do in coaching is, we might have a pretty rough week, hard week of practice, and maybe we'd do relays or something, and a team would get prizes, but you'd make sure every team got a prize at some point, and just bring in the fun. And I think that's another thing. Sometimes you just have to bring in the fun to the classroom.
Did those skills translate when you became an administrator and director?
Did. Yeah, I think they did. I learned so much along the way, and I look back now, and I think of how many times I would have fired myself. And I was like, whoa, you did what? Again, when you're a principal in a small place, you need the faculty to be a team. You need them to be able to care for one another and to respect one another, and things like, okay, this group of us is teaching juniors. We can't all give a test on the same day. And we have to be able to let go of our lesson plans and say, let's be flexible. So, it'd be fun to, bring treats for the faculty, or, have a surprise, maybe a card or something on their desk that, just little things that you can do to build relationships with people. I think the building of relationships is maybe the most important thing that you can do as teacher, coach.
Lots of people I know who have worked with you or are friends with you all remark at your ability to establish relationship and make connections, human connections with people. That's important. You've outlined for an educator, a coach, a director, but there's a fundraising piece. And Monroe, because it's a Catholic private school, doesn't have state funds. So making sure you have enough each year to keep the doors open is a big challenge. And that relationship piece must play a really big role in achieving that end.
It does. And I had the opportunity when Sister Eileen left, and then I became the director of schools. Father McGuigan was still the president of Monroe Foundation. So as director of schools, I was, at that time, that was in '89, so '89 to 2000, my focus was really just on dealing with enrollment, tuition, and who we were as school, what were we doing, what we said we wanted to do, and that kind of thing. So and really trying to be a K through 12 institution. So that was one piece. I worked a lot with Father McGuigan because tuition was never going to cover everything. So we had to have the donors. And
But
so
you never learned to golf.
I never learned.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference there, Nancy.
I did take golf lessons the summer of 2000, but I didn't go anywhere with it. So I had that opportunity with Father McGuigan to watch him with the Monroe Foundation Board of Directors, to watch him with donors. And one of the people who admired Father McGuigan and admired the work that he did was my dad. And my dad, who wasn't a churchgoer, wasn't sure he believed in God, but he really liked Father McGuigan. And Father McGuigan would tell me, well, your dad and I had another pretty fascinating conversation about, is there a God or not? Different things. Dad was on Father McGuigan's board of directors. So I saw that kind of relationship building. Sister Eileen was also very good at, building relationships with community members. And so, I observed that and understood. And Father McGuigan, certainly lots of his relationships were through golf, but they were also through family. He knew the families here. And so it just seemed to be that's what you did. I guess that was what happened. And the summer of 2000 was somewhat earth-shattering. Father McGuigan died in June of 2000, and then totally unexpectedly, Bishop Kinnicky died in August. And Bishop Kinnicky had, at that point, when this new building was being built, one of his, the consultants he had brought up to help us with this whole piece, had said, you need to have just one board. You can't have a school board and a foundation board. They need to be working together. So Bishop Kinnicky had formed that board, and Father McGuigan had been dealing with cancer for a while. So he'd asked me if I would do the piece of being both director of schools and the Monroe Foundation piece. And I said, oh, sure, why not? And little did I know when I said, oh, sure, why not, that both of them were going to not be there to be guides.
Right.
And so it was just like jumping in and learning. I'd done a lot with HiPow, so it wasn't really starting over with HiPow, but learning a lot there and learning to, and I knew a lot of the players in HiPow, so that was helpful. But again, just getting to know the people and the volunteers, the people who were donating that. It's just two things you have to do. You have to have a good product here. We have to be doing well. I don't like referring to education as a product, but we had to be doing well and having success. And we had to have that story. Donors like stories. So you had to be able to take the story of the school to the donors. And we did that with the building of this place. And so we had a kickstart on that, and we had a consultant up from Seattle who helped us on some of that. And then we went from there.
You took a break from being director of schools and the head of the Monroe Foundation and returned in 2007. Is that when you met Bob?
Oh yeah, so I took, when I took on the whole job, I realize now, and though we have never gone back to the two people, but it was a lot of work.
You think?
And it had been a pretty emotional time with Bishop Kinnicky, and I had become pretty good friends. Having him die was pretty difficult, and then the next spring my father died, and my mother got very ill. We had to medevac her out of here shortly after Dad died. And so she couldn't live alone for a while. I needed to live with her. And so by the end of 2002 or 3, or the end of the 2002-03 school year, I just said, I can't keep doing this. I'm really tired. And so I didn't get to retire, and it wasn't really retiring. It was just, I can't do this. And so I wanted to simplify my life. And so end of October, they had a replacement for me, and I went off to simplify my life.
Didn't work out so well.
So in December, I ran into Bob Hanson, who was one of my brother's closest friends. His first wife's funeral was here at the school. I'd known them. Their kids went to school here. I'd known them. I'd known Bob since I was a little kid, and he didn't realize I'd retired. He was kind of surprised by that. So sometime we ran into one other at Denali State Bank, and Joe Heckman was asking me what I was doing now that I was not working. I said, oh, I just got back from a trip with my mom, that kind of thing. And so then a few weeks later, I get a call from Bob saying, did I want to go out? And I said, no, I don't. The thought of going out with one of my brother's closest friends was not, it wasn't happening. And so he took my brother and his wife, took Jeff and Sue out. They went out to dinner. They'd often gone out to dinner because their anniversaries were very close to one another. So then on Christmas Eve, he shows up at the house, and I was still with Mom, with a photo that he'd taken, to give to my mother of Jeff and Sue. Anyway, to make a long story short, I did relent and go out with him, and 6 months later, we got married.
And you inherited a family at that.
I did, and it was fun. I knew the kids because they had gone to school here, and Bob, everything was, he had checked with them before he even called to ask me out, and then, so there was all this checking going on.
Yeah.
And, we had I inherited kids, and there were at the time granddaughters to get to know and get to play with. And so it was a whole new adventure for me, and it was a good adventure. We had two
And
very...
even though he passed away a couple of years
We
later?
had 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years, and then
But you still have the family.
I still have the family. The family is mine, and I still refer to myself as stepmom. They refer to me as bonus mom. I'm their bonus mom. So, and
That's great.
we have a great relationship.
Yeah.
They, in a sense, are a gift to me and the grandkids. So
Now that you've retired, you've been recognized a number of times. The Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts have recognized you. You've received other accolades. Are you serving as a mentor for others, for the new generation?
Well, in terms of here, I touch base fairly frequently, and not too frequently, with Amanda and Gaiak, who is the new Director of Schools, President of Monroe Foundation, and with Cass Cerny-Faree, who is the Development Director. And when I was leaving, they knew and I knew that I would be willing to help wherever I was needed to help, and to stay in the background wherever they needed me to stay in the background. So I think we have a good working relationship, or a retirement relationship for me.
Yeah.
And so it's good, and I'm grateful, and it's exciting for me because I hired Amanda originally to be the principal of the elementary school. So it's exciting for me to be able to see her develop the commitment to the place that I have.
Well, let's see. I want to touch on just two last things. One, where did you find the time to get a pilot's license?
That was back when I was after my first year at Fort Greely. You're in Delta, and there's a lot of small planes there. And one of the things that I used to like to do was to tell myself to get out of my comfort zone. And flying was definitely...
Yeah, but 10,000 feet up, you don't know.
You take private pilots, you take ground school, do that, and then, you start flying. And I'm not very good at relying on instruments and stuff. I like to see things. And I am totally directionless. And so that also is a problem. In one of my first solo flights, not distant solo flights, I flew to Greeley, landed at the FAA field there, and the folk, the guys that meet me when I get out of the plane, they said, "You did great landing, except you landed backwards," because maybe it's the way the runways go. And I go, "Oh well, at least there was nobody else around." And so I flew quite a bit, and then one of my teammates from the university was also a pilot, and she took me up flying a lot so I could learn to fly a tail dragger, because I'd always learned on the tricycle wheels. So it was fun.
Yeah.
It was enjoyable.
Yeah.
But at some point, I made the decision that I would rather eat than fly.
Well, yeah,
And
it's pricey. The
it's
insurance,
very-
I think, is almost more than the aircraft.
Yeah, it's very expensive, and to get enough hours to be good. I mean, to get enough hours where I would have been confident to take anyone else in a plane with me, it wasn't going to happen, and the time. So.
I was just so impressed that
Yeah.
among your other accomplishments, you also got a pilot's license.
I like to throw that one out.
Yeah,
now and then.
of course. And finally, now that you're retired, it's so interesting that you've taken some courses up at UAF. So in a sense, that community circle closes back around. What kind of courses, why is lifelong learning an important?
Well, it is, and I haven't taken classes up there real recently, but in the 2000s, I think I've taken different writing classes and literature, that kind of thing. One summer was able to do the summer arts piece when they have the visiting writers come up. So I will get back and take more classes. Lifelong learning is important to me. I'll investigate OLLI a little bit more. I promised myself a year without too much, going on. A couple things about the university. One of the things that my parents, when they first came here, 38, They didn't get a car until 48. So there's lots to, sort of think about in that. But every time I would take my mom up to the university, she would say, and which, was fairly frequent, she'd say, "Your dad and I used to walk up here to go to dances."
No kidding.
And so the university was always a part of their life too. And so I think in the end, I think they were pretty happy that I came back to the University of Alaska and that they have an alum from, the University of Alaska. And I think, just having that university here is, it's so important to this community. So I want to be a part of it again. Now that I have more time to be a more active part of that, whether it's being a student or, most likely being a student, continuing to learn. Yeah.
Well, we're all grateful that you're part of our community. Thank you, Nancy Cook Hanson, for talking with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for listening.